Okay, we are going to do Module 1, Lesson 1, Rounding Decimals. This is for September 2nd, 2020. I'm going to write down a little poem that should really help you with rounding decimals. And then I'll teach you the way that Eureka Math is teaching us, okay? So you find your place and look next door. 5 or greater. Just add one more. 4 or less. Just let it rest. And here's a little sleeping face. Sleeping. Let it rest. Okay. Here's here's an example. I'm going to say the rhyme while I'm doing it. If I had 38 and 47 hundredths, I'm going to use colored ink to show you what I'm doing. And I needed to round it to the nearest tenth. Okay, so I have to round this to the tenth. I have 38 and 47 hundredths. It says, find your place. So find your place by underlining it. Okay, and then look next door. So your 4 is going to look next door at the 7. Find your place, look next door. So underline your place, put a box around next door. Find your place, look next door. Okay, and then I'm going to say if it's 5 or greater, just add one more. So I'm going to add one more to the place value that I'm looking at. So if I have to round to the tenths, that means that I'm stopping here. This is the tenths place, right? This one. Because this is the hundredths. I'm not stopping there. I'm find my place, tenths, underline it. I'm going to look over at the 7 and I'm going to say, if you're 5 or greater, I'm going to add one more, which makes my answer 38 point. If I'm adding one more, my answer becomes 38.5. Now, if it was 4 and below, I'll try the exact same number, 38.44. I would find my place, look next door, 4 or less, let it rest. So instead of shoving it up to 5, I'm going to let it rest at 4. No matter what you're doing is you're stopping in your place. So when it asks me to round to the tenths place, I go to my tenths place. I know no matter what, my number is stopping right there. See how it stopped at the tenths? And it's either going to be 38.4 or it's going to be 38.5. I just need to decide, is it going to be 0.4 or 0.5? Well, if the number next door is 5 or greater, add one more. So it becomes 38.5. If the number next door is 4 or less, let it rest. Okay? Sometimes you're going to see it ask you to round to the nearest whole. Okay, I'm going to tell you a secret. Whole means one's place. So if I had something like 1.914, and I had to round it to the nearest whole, I find my place, look next door, 5 or greater, add one more. I'm not adding one more to the 9, I'm adding one more to the place that I'm looking at. So my answer becomes 2 or 2.0. That's rounding to the nearest whole, because whole means ones place. In the Eureka lesson, they are having you round the same way, but it gets a little more specific when they use these place value charts. These number lines, okay? So these are just number lines, and you have a number, like in number 1, you have 3.1, right? And you're rounding it to the nearest hundreds. So remember I told you every number is either we're gonna either let it rest at 3.1, or we're going to give it a shove and go one more. So either we're going to let it rest at 3.1, 3.1 is actually 3.10, or we're going to shove it up to 3.11. It's either these, because the place value is tenths in this one, or I'm sorry, hundredths. So I had to add a 0 to even get to the hundredths. So the reason I added this 0, which always existed right here, was even to get to the hundredths. Now, either I'm going to stay at 3.10 or I'm going to stay at 3.11. And right in between is 3.10. If I put a 5 here, a 0 here and a 0 here, I'm sorry, this is 100 and this is 110. Right in between 100 and 110 is 105. Then I'm going to find my number and find where would it land on the number line. Well, my number was 3.1. So my number, is it closer to 3.11 or is it closer to 3.1? It's closer to 3.1. Now, if I was doing that in tenths, that means this time I'm stopping at the tenths place, which is the first number after the decimal point. So either I'm going to leave it at 3.1, or I'm going to round it up to 3.2 because I'm giving the tenths place, add one more, right? There's not even anything to look at next door. But if I was going to show you the in-between spot, that would be 3.15, because if you added a 0 here and added a 0 here, this is 10, 15, 20. Then you take your number and figure out where does it lie on this place value chart. Well, again, it rounds to 3.1. So if we round it to the nearest hundredths, it's 3.10. If we round to the nearest tenths, it's 3.1. Now we're looking at tens. So either it's 110, either 3.10 is close to 10, or, I guess 3.10 is either close to the 0 in the tens place or close to 10 in the tens place. I know that's a little confusing, but if you think about it on a dry erase, we have 3.1, right? Right now we have 0 in the tens place. So my 3.1, what's halfway between 0 and 10? 5. My 3.1 would land right about 1, 2, 3, right about here. This is where 3.1 lands. And then I ask myself, am I above the 5? No. I'm going to round down to 0. 3.1, when it's rounded to the nearest tens, this means about, that's a symbol for rounding, is about 0 if I had to round it to the nearest tenths. So that's how you would do number 1 in the problem set, is basically like this. I would say when all those same numbers are right here, everything that I just did in the notes, right? But if I was doing it on the place value chart, the hundreds goes 3.1 and I put a 0. The tenths goes 3.1. And the tens, is 0. 0 in the tens place. So rounded to the nearest hundreds is here. Rounded to the nearest tenths is here. If I had to round to the nearest ones, it would have been 3. But I had to round to the nearest tens. When you meet me in small group, you'll see that I may not have you actually do this part. We'll just do this part.